Okay, I want you to do something. Take your smartphone out of your pocket right now. Just look at it. It feels like this seamless, magical piece of technology. But if you strip away all the software, the apps, the shiny glass, what are you actually left with?
You're left with a paperweight, an expensive rock.
Exactly.
Mm.
A paperweight. And the difference between that paperweight and the marvel in your hand, it's a tiny, tiny pinch of something we're going to call magic dust.
It's absolutely true. And we're not talking about steel or aluminum here, the things that built the last century. We're talking about, 17 very specific elements on the periodic table, the rare earth elements.
Right.
They're just trace additions, but they are completely indispensable. Things like neodymium for the little motor that makes your phone vibrate, or dysprosium, which makes sure the high-tech parts don't overheat and fail. Without that dust, the device is just, it's dead weight.
The milligrams of material make the difference. So now let's scale that idea up. Let's go from the phone in your pocket to the ultimate expression of modern military power. The F-35 fighter jet, the pinnacle of U.S. air superiority. Radar evading, lightning fast.
And this is exactly where the problem shifts from, an economic issue to a truly terrifying national security risk.
How so?
That F-35, that incredible machine, it requires a staggering 920 pounds of this specialized material just to fly.
920 pounds.
Almost half a ton of this so-called magic dust. It's in the guidance systems, the engine's powerful magnets, the sensors, the electronics. The entire platform depends on a steady supply of these invisible elements.
And that brings us to the one question that defines this entire deep dive today.
Yeah.
And it's a question that should frankly stop you in your tracks. What if the elements required for that jet, the jet built to project American power, are almost entirely supplied and refined by the very adversary it was built to fight?
That is the reality. That's not a hypothetical. For decades, the world has been worried about oil. Will OPEC turn off the taps? But while everyone was staring at the Middle East, the real strategic threat was quietly being built, element by element, on the periodic table.
So today, we're investigating what we're calling the rare earth reality. We're going to expose the unseen stranglehold that China has methodically engineered over the last 30 years.
A stranglehold so complete it threatens to paralyze the entire Western tech industry, from your phone to green energy, all the way up to the F-35.
Our mission today is to break down how China achieved a near 90% control over the world's processing capacity. And that word is key processing.
Right. It's not about who has the rocks. It's about who has the incredibly complex chemistry set to make them usable.
And if you control the elements,
you control the future. And right now, the West is just renting those foundations from Beijing.
Okay, so let's unpack this a bit. The term rare earths sounds, a little esoteric, something for geologists, but we've called them the vitamins of modern industry. Why is that analogy so fitting?
It works perfectly because, just like vitamins for your body, you don't need a lot of them. You don't need tons. You might just need a few grams in a laptop or a wind turbine. But without those few grams, the whole system either works poorly or it just flat out fails.
They're invisible, but indispensable.
Exactly. They are the catalysts. They're what let engineers make things smaller, more powerful, more efficient than was ever possible with old materials like iron and copper.
And when we say rare earths, we're talking about those 17 elements. But for today, let's just focus on the two stars of the show we mentioned, neodymium and dysprosium.
Absolutely. So neodymium is, it's the king. It's the key ingredient for the world's most powerful permanent magnets. We're not talking about the flimsy magnet on your refrigerator. These are incredibly powerful magnets that are essential for anything that needs to spin with high efficiency.
So hard drives, electric car motors.
Electric car motors, huge wind turbine generators, high-fidelity speakers. Neodymium gives you that incredible power in a tiny package.
Okay, so that's the power. But you mentioned a second element, dysprosium. What's its role?
Well, you run into a problem. Heat. When these powerful magnets get hot, like in an EV motor climbing a hill or, a jet engine at Mach 1, they start to lose their magnetism. They demagnetize.
Which should be catastrophic.
Utterly. So you add a little bit of dysprosium, which is a heavy rare earth, into the mix, and it dramatically increases the magnet's ability to resist that heat. It's the stability agent. For anything high performance or military grade, it's absolutely mission critical.
So we're really seeing a fundamental shift. The 20th century was built on steel and oil. The 21st century, the one that's all about AI, green energy, advanced defense, it's being built on these high-tech metals.
That is the strategic reality. And that leads us to the dependency, because the numbers here can be a little misleading if you're not careful.
Right. The media often talks about mining.
Yes, you'll hear that China controls about 60% of the world's rare earth mining, and that's a big number, don't get me wrong. But that is not the strategic chokehold. That's not the real weapon.
This is where it gets really alarming because we have to understand the difference between just digging a hole in the ground and creating something useful.
The critical figure, the one that should worry everyone, is that China controls nearly 90% of the global processing capacity.
9%.
That is the choke point. See, mining is just digging up rocks. Processing is the incredibly complex, multi-stage chemical and metallurgical work it takes to turn that rock into a 99.99% pure metal that you can actually put in a jet engine.
So you can have a mountain full of these rocks in, say, Wyoming or Australia.
But they're worthless. They are
Yeah.
completely useless without the massive, sophisticated chemical plants to separate and purify them.
So it's not just that China owns the mine. They own the factory, the recipe book, and the entire chemistry set.
That's the alarm bell. The elements themselves aren't actually that rare geologically. What is incredibly rare outside of China is the industrial base, the engineers, the know-how, and the sheer capacity to refine them. When you control 90% of that, you control the price, you control the quality, and you control whether the rest of the world gets any at all.
So how on earth did the world get here? To this point of extreme strategic vulnerability. This wasn't an accident, was it?
No, not at all. This was a deliberate, patient 30-year masterstroke. To understand it, you have to go all the way back to the early 1990s. While the West was, celebrating the end of the Cold War, focused on quarterly profits, outsourcing everything, China was playing a completely different game, a much longer game.
And this started right at the top with Deng Xiaoping.
Yes, the architect of modern China. He saw this not as just another commodity, but as a future tool of national power. And he codified that vision in a now famous prophecy.
The quote is pretty stark.
It is. In 1992, he said, "The Middle East has oil, China has rare earths."
That's not a casual observation.
That is a doctrine. It's a statement of intent. He understood that if oil gave you leverage in the 20th century, these elements, the building blocks of microchips, missile guidance, and green tech, would give you leverage in the 21st. And the policy that followed from that day forward was designed for one thing: total global dominance of this sector.
Okay, so once you have the doctrine, how do you execute it? How did they manage to push out everyone else, including the United States, which was the world leader at the time?
It was a brutal state-sponsored economic campaign on three fronts. First, they unleashed massive state subsidies. Their miners and refiners got cheap land, zero-interest loans, huge tax breaks that immediately crushed their internal costs.
But subsidies alone wouldn't bankrupt a profitable American company, would it?
Not alone, no. That's where the second and probably most important advantage comes in. And it's a deeply ironic one. China simply chose to ignore all environmental costs. As we'll get into, refining these elements is a dirty, dirty business. It creates vast amounts of toxic and slightly radioactive waste. In the West, dealing with that waste is incredibly expensive because of environmental laws. China just didn't. For decades, they just dumped it.
So you combine massive government subsidies with zero environmental costs.
And you get an artificial, unbeatable price advantage, which allowed them to execute phase 3. They flooded the global market. They drove the price of rare earths so far into the floor that no Western company, which had to pay fair wages and clean up its own mess, could possibly survive.
They weaponized price.
They bankrupted the competition. Deliberately.
And the most famous casualty of this strategy was right here in the U.S., the Mountain Pass mine in California.
Mountain Pass is the poster child for the strategic failure. For decades, it was the world's leading producer of rare earths. It's in the Mojave Desert. But by the late 90s, caught between the high cost of complying with U.S. environmental laws and the flood of ultra-cheap Chinese material, it just became impossible to operate.
So they shut down.
They shut down the processing plant first. Then the whole mine went into bankruptcy in the early 2000s. It was a complete surrender of American industrial capacity.
So the West basically looked at the cheap Chinese price tag and said, why should we do this dirty, expensive work ourselves when Beijing will do it for pennies on the dollar?
That is the brutal, honest truth. For the sake of cheaper magnets and toys and computers, we made a conscious choice. We dismantled our own strategic industry. We didn't just outsource a job. We outsourced the keys to our entire technological future. We effectively handed the keys to the future to Beijing for a short-term discount.
It's a staggering failure of foresight. We prioritized the quarterly report over national security. Okay, so this brings us to the core of the problem today, because you still hear people say, well, rare earths aren't actually rare. We have deposits here in the U.S., in Canada, Australia.
Mm.
And while that's technically true, it's what we call the raw material fallacy.
It's the most common and dangerous misconception out there. Yes, the geology is not unique to China, but that completely misses the point. The real problem, the unbreakable chokehold, is the processing bottleneck.
The step that comes after mining.
Right. The step that turns a useless, slightly radioactive rock into a high-purity metal magnet. And that step is not simple smelting. It is a full-blown chemical nightmare.
Let's get into that a bit. What makes it so hard? Why did the West just give up on it?
It comes down to their position on the periodic table. They're all chemically almost identical. They clump together in the ore.
Like trying to unscramble an egg.
A very good analogy.
Yeah.
To separate them, you can't just melt them apart. You have to use a process called solvent extraction. This involves dissolving the ore in powerful acids and then running that toxic soup through hundreds, sometimes thousands, of giant interconnected tanks. Each tank uses a special chemical to pull out just one or two elements at a time. It's a vast, complicated, and continuous process.
And I imagine it produces a lot of waste.
Massive amounts. Huge quantities of acidic sludge filled with heavy metals and low-level radioactive elements like thorium, creating what are essentially toxic waste lakes. The cost of safely managing and storing that waste under Western environmental law is what made it impossible for our companies to compete.
And there it is, the dark irony of this whole situation. We shut down our own industry in the name of protecting our environment.
And we just outsourced the pollution. We didn't get rid of the toxic lakes. We just paid China to have them in their country instead of ours.
And in doing so, we created this deep strategic vulnerability where we now have to buy the finished dirty metals back from the very country that used lax environmental standards to put us out of business in the first place.
We traded local environmental cleanliness for total strategic dependency. It's a textbook example of a self-inflicted wound.
And the supply chain that exists today. It
Yeah.
is just absurd. Walk us through the journey of this material right now.
Okay, so take the reopened Mountain Pass mine. A U.S. company mines the ore in California. They do some basic crushing. But because we still don't have the final complex purification facilities here at scale, they have to put that concentrated ore on a ship.
And send it where?
They ship it to China.
You're kidding me.
No, it goes across the Pacific. In China, it undergoes that difficult solvent extraction, the refining, the alloying. That's where the real pollution happens. And then, after China has turned our rock into a high-value finished magnet, they put it on another ship.
And they sell it back to us.
And sell it right back to us at a huge markup to be put into our electric cars, our wind turbines, and our fighter jets.
We've outsourced the value add and kept only the hole in the ground. We've become a raw material colony for our own advanced technology.
And that leads us directly back to the F-35 problem. This isn't some abstract economic theory. This is a clear and present danger.
The F-35 program is the future of American air power. Trillions of dollars invested over its lifetime.
And its guts, its brain, its heart, they all depend on that absurd supply chain. The 920 pounds of material in every jet, the engine components, the radar, the targeting systems are all dependent on Chinese processing.
So if there were a conflict,
If China restricted the export of a specific dysprosium alloy, the F-35 assembly line could grind to a halt. We'd struggle to repair the jets we already have, let alone build new ones. Our premier military advantage is conditional on the goodwill of our primary strategic competitor. It's a terrifying reality.
now some people might be thinking, okay, this is a vulnerability, but would they actually use it? Would they turn off the valve?
We don't have to guess. They already have. There was a test case, a very clear warning shot, back in 2010.
You're talking about the incident with Japan.
Exactly. In September 2010, there was a dispute over some islands. A Chinese fishing boat collided with Japanese Coast Guard vessels. Tensions flared. And China's response wasn't military, it was silent. They just administratively halted all exports of rare earth to Japan.
And Japan's economy is incredibly high-tech. They need this stuff for everything.
Everything. Cars, robots, electronics, and the impact was immediate and catastrophic.
What happened to the price?
The price of key elements that Japan desperately needed spiked by 2,000%.
2,000%.
Yes, Japan's entire high-tech manufacturing sector panicked. They had no stockpiles, no alternative suppliers. They were completely exposed. It was a demonstration, a very public one, of the power of this chokehold.
So it proved that China could cripple a major industrial economy without firing a single bullet.
It was a successful test of the weapon. It sent a message to the world that this wasn't just a commodity anymore. It was a state-controlled strategic lever.
Okay, so let's game this out in a modern scenario. Let's say tensions escalate over Taiwan. What does the first move look like?
It would likely be subtle at first. They would announce export controls on certain high-purity materials, neodymium, dysprosium, citing national security. It's a move they've used with other minerals. It's perfectly legal under international trade rules, and given their market share, it's impossible to challenge.
And because the entire Western world runs on a just-in-time supply chain with minimal inventory, the effect would be immediate.
Instantaneous. The assembly lines would feel it within weeks because there is no strategic stockpile, there's no backup plan. Ford's EV production, it would grind to a halt. Those giant wind turbines from Vestas, production stops. And most critically, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, they would immediately face shortages for the components needed for missiles, for radar, and for the F-35.
So China could effectively pause the Western economy, freeze our climate goals, and degrade our military readiness just by stopping the shipment of a specialized dust.
That's economic warfare at the elemental level, weaponizing the periodic table. And the scary part is we walked right into it, especially with our climate ambitions. This is what we have to call the green energy geopolitical trap.
Right. This is so important. The whole push for renewables was sold as a way to achieve energy independence, to get away from our reliance on OPEC.
But we've just swapped one dependency for another, arguably a more dangerous one.
How so?
A green energy transition is fundamentally a transition from an economy built on fuel to one built on metals. And who controls those metals?
China.
An electric car is just a sculpture without a motor full of Chinese processed neodymium magnets. A giant wind turbine needs tons of them. We are building our entire independent green future on a foundation that is wholly owned and controlled by our chief geopolitical rival.
So instead of freeing ourselves from the politics of oil, we've chained ourselves to the politics of elements. It's a massive strategic failure of planning.
Okay, so the alarm bells are finally ringing in Washington and other Western capitals. People are waking up to this. So what's happening now? What does this global scramble to fix the problem actually look like?
It's intense. There's a huge amount of government money flowing now. The U.S. has used the Defense Production Act to fund domestic processing. You have companies like MP Materials in the U.S. and Linus in Australia, which is the biggest non-Chinese producer, getting massive support. Everyone is racing to build a secure, non-China supply chain from scratch.
And are they just focused on digging new mines and building new refineries? Or are there other ideas being explored?
There are really two other avenues. The first is urban mining, which sounds great. It's recycling the rare earths from all our old electronics, iPhones, laptops.
And the second?
Substitution. Trying to design new motors and electronics that just don't need these critical elements. Tesla, for example, has talked about moving away from rare earth magnets in some of their cars. So is substitution a viable escape route? Can we just engineer our way out of this problem?
In some cases, maybe. For lower performance applications, but the laws of physics are pretty stubborn. Neodymium magnets are they're miraculous. They give you incredible power in a small, lightweight package. If you try to get that same power from another type of magnet, it's usually much bigger and heavier. That's a trade-off you just can't make in a fighter jet or a long-range EV. So it's a long-term goal, not a short-term fix.
And urban mining. Can we recycle our way to independence?
Not yet. The concentration of these elements in e-waste is tiny, and getting them out is incredibly difficult and expensive. It's important for sustainability, for sure, but the volume it can produce is just a drop in the bucket compared to what industry needs every year.
So the main path forward really is building new processing plants. And this gets us back to that sobering reality. China has a 30-year head start. We're essentially running in quicksand.
That's the perfect metaphor. The quicksand is our own regulations and processes. In China, they can build a massive new refinery in 18 months. In the West, because of the strict environmental standards we rightly have, just getting the permits to build one of these plants can take 5 years. Then construction takes another 5.
So it's a 10-year process.
It can easily take 10 years to permit and build a single rare earth processing plant here. A decade. Which means for the entire next decade, we remain fundamentally vulnerable to an embargo. We're in a race, but we've given our competitor a massive head start.
So that brings us to the crucial question for anyone listening, investors, policymakers, anyone. How do you navigate this new element war?
There are a few key takeaways. First, you have to understand where the real strategic value is now. It's not the tech companies like Apple or Tesla. They're the vulnerable customer.
They're at the end of the supply chain.
Exactly. The real strategic assets are the mining and, more importantly, the processing companies that are operating completely outside of China, the ones in Australia, Canada, the US. They're basically strategic infrastructure now, and they're getting huge government backing.
Okay, what's the second point?
The second is that the era of cheap tech is ending. That era was built on an illusion, the illusion of cheap Chinese production that ignored environmental costs. If the West is going to build its own secure, clean supply chain, that's going to be much more expensive. And that cost will be passed on. The true cost of independence will be priced into every EV, every phone, every missile. We're entering a commodity supercycle for these metals.
And the final point, for anyone invested in the green transition.
You have to hedge this risk. If you are all in on green energy stocks, you are making a massive implicit bet that China's supply chain will remain cheap and open. That is a terrible bet to make right now. Every wind turbine company, every EV company is effectively betting on the goodwill of Beijing. That geopolitical risk has to be priced in.
Because at the end of the day, you can't just wish these materials into existence.
You can't, and that leads to the definitive statement for this whole issue. The periodic table doesn't negotiate. The elements are where they are. The processing plants are where they've been built. For 30 years, China built the blocks. We are just renting them. #OutJoePeck.
For the last generation, our entire focus has been on software, on the cloud, on the digital world. We thought high-tech was all about code. We completely forgot that high-tech stands on a foundation of physical things. It needs high rocks.
China never forgot that. They built their entire national strategy on that physical foundation while we were focused on the virtual.
And the resulting stranglehold is incredibly tight. Breaking it isn't just a matter of money. It's going to take a level of long-term political will that is, frankly, very hard to maintain. It's the defining industrial challenge of the next decade.
And every day we wait, the deeper the hole gets.
So this all leads us to one final, unavoidable debate. A question for you to really think about after this is over. Is it possible to have a green future without bowing to China?
And that's the ethical dilemma at the heart of it. To get that independence, we have to make a choice. Do we reopen U.S. mines? Do we build these chemical plants here, knowing it means accepting some local environmental damage? Do we accept our own toxic waste lakes to secure our freedom?
Or do we continue to keep our hands clean here at home, knowing that it means we're just exporting the pollution and buying back the dirty metals from a strategic rival, leaving our military and our economy completely dependent on them?
There's no clean, easy answer. The solution is messy, it's expensive, and it requires some hard choices about what we're willing to tolerate in our own backyard to be secure.
Because until we make that choice, we remain vulnerable.
The future belongs to the owners of the elements.